Good morning, everyone. We are excited for those of you who are joining. We will be starting very soon. We're just giving a few more minutes for people to join and for our Lieutenant Governor to get logged in, and we will begin shortly. Thank you. Good morning. My apologies. I love technology when it works, and that's what happens when we're all in a virtual world. So
Mercury's in retrograde, so it's all happening, and I got a chance to visit with Robert, so that's good.
Yeah, I keep hearing about this Mercury in retrograde. Well, good morning. I'm really excited about our conversation. I don't know what all happened while I was gone, but this conversation is part of the Thriving Cities conversation and events, the Thriving Cities events that is happening. Conversation between the two of us, and a little bit about myself for those who don't know me. I'm Nicole Matthews. I'm the Executive Director at the Minnesota Indian Women Sexual Assault Coalition. I am Anishinaabe from the White Earth Band of Ojibwe. And we are, I've been doing this work on addressing gender-based violence, which is so connected to civic engagement and organizing with communities. And we have worked for 2 decades. We're celebrating our 20-year anniversary. So, and prior to that was doing advocacy. So I'm really honored to be here with you today, Lieutenant Governor, if you want to just give a little welcome.
Sure. Well, bonjour, good morning, everybody. I'm Peggy Flanagan. I'm Lieutenant Governor, and I'm Anishinaabe from White Earth, and have been working in the community for a while, and have known Nicole for a long time too. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm super excited that we are able to just have this conversation today, and just to be here. And I know that so much of that work that we've been able to do over the last 20 years, we are now seeing implemented, and it's really exciting. We're in a super exciting moment, and for this, for Thriving Cities, and the work of NACDI, also highlighting that there's this incredible, robust, beautiful urban Native community that we have here too. And I just am so excited to be a part of it, and to be able to lift up the good work that's happening there too.
Yeah, thank you. So let's start with, if you could talk a little bit about your path to this moment. Like, how did we get here? You talked about, all the work we've done in the last 20 years is kind of, we're now seeing, a lot of movement. And what does your current role mean to you?
Well, I've said this to you before, Nicole, but it bears repeating, which is that growing up, I didn't expect to be lieutenant governor. It was not my dream as a little girl to be the second in command in Minnesota. I've said this before, but I wanted to be a ballerina nurse, which is exactly what it sounds like. And, now this path is here. But I really think that, the path that got me here, it started, my first grown-up job, as I like to call it, was at the Division of Indian Work. And I worked in the Youth Leadership Development Program under, at the time, the director there, who's now the executive director, Louise Matson, who has done incredible things with DIW, but also is really intentional about growing new leaders. And I feel really fortunate to be able to have her be a mentor for me. But it was through that experience of working on a program called Parents Plus, which helped to bridge the gap between home and school for Native children and their families, that I saw how difficult it was for our families to navigate these systems in public education. And I was like, we have to do something about it. And so spent about 6 months trying to find somebody to run for the school board. And then I remember we had this event at the Indian Center, and some folks were like, well, why don't you do it? And I was like, what? No way. But then thought about it, and we were able to bring forward, I think, a lot of momentum and energy when there were folks who would say things like, oh, don't bother knocking in those neighborhoods, right? Like, those people don't vote. And I'm like, well, I am those people. And those are the folks who we need to hear from. And we're able to have the memorandum of understanding through the school district. And after that election, and it's just been, since that time, seeing electoral politics as a tool in our toolbox to try to get the policies that our people deserve. And even just today or yesterday, I think Minneapolis Public Schools unveiled a video where they have the 11 flags of the 7 Ojibwe nations and 4 Dakota communities that are now in the boardroom. And that feels like that is just momentum that we have been building up over the last several years. So now, in my role as lieutenant governor, I thought that, we have been headed in the same direction in this state for 163 years, right? Mm-hmm. And that there's an opportunity to change the way that we do things, especially for Native people. And it is a reminder every day, right, when we walk into the Capitol, I take 2 deep breaths. The first breath is just a breath of acknowledging the responsibility of being in this role. And the second breath, honestly, is a breath of protection, frankly, walking into a system that was not created by us or for us, but in many ways was created to eliminate us. And that is something that I carry every day, and know in this role that I am an advisor and try to do as much as I can to bring the voice of our people into the room. And that, we've been able to see some of those good things come true fruition because of the fact that we have more and more folks who are in seats as decision makers. And so my goal here, as we are in this role, as I'm in this role as lieutenant governor, is to try to make sure that I am not the first Anishinaabe to be lieutenant governor and then the last, but that we are creating a path where people can see themselves in these roles, and that we change the way that we work together. Bonjour.
Bonjour. How are you?
Good to see you.
Yeah, hi. So Hi, Buju, Anindinwe Magini Duk, Elizabeth Day, Indigenous. Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Day, and I work at the Native American Community Development Institute, or NACDI as they call it. One of my roles there is to oversee the Make Voting a Tradition project. We're a year-round civic engagement program. And thank you for being patient as I fought through some technical difficulties. I was hoping to jump on and introduce the event today, but I had to reset my internet. So it's just the times that we're in, I suppose. But I just wanted to hop on and say hi and welcome, and just talk a little bit really quickly about how we came together today. I'm not sure if you had already addressed that or not, but I'll just hop in. So this conversation was really spurred on by one of our national partners, the NUIFC, National Urban Indian Family Coalition. They're based out of Seattle, Washington. And they put together an event called Thriving Cities, Indigenous Spaces in the 21st Century. And as I was watching our partners nationally hosting their various events, I thought, wow, what a great opportunity to have a conversation with an elected official. And we're hoping that this conversation will be the first in many conversations with elected officials. And really the point is for us to learn as citizens, what are the roles and responsibilities of elected officials? How can we as responsible citizens engage with elected officials, figure out how to navigate that whole world, and how do we engage in really, if there's an issue that's deep and important to us, how can we use our elected officials as the tools that they're meant to be? So just Chimigwich, thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor, for being available to lead us in this first conversation. And thank you so much to Nicole Matthews for being a part of this conversation. And I think together, I have goosebumps just looking at all these strong Indigenous women coming together to lead us to create real systemic change. And it makes my heart feel so happy to be here right now. So with that, I will turn it back to Nicole and continue this conversation. The Thriving Cities in Indigenous Spaces presents Stepping into the Circle, a conversation with Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan and Nicole Matthews. So, miigwech.
Thank you. Well, let's try this again, and hopefully I won't keep freezing. I can still hear you and see you the entire time, so I'm still with you, even if I'm frozen. But when I was listening to you talk, when you started on the Minneapolis School Board, that is when I really got to know you all those years ago, and thinking about civic engagement, and to me it felt really special to have someone represent us on the school board. And I remember at the time my daughter was in middle school and having to come to you because I didn't see any other you were a friendly face, and I was like, okay, this is one of us on the school board, and we were having some problems with another girl who was being sexually harassed, and you were so responsive. And so could you talk a little bit about what civic engagement means to you and the power of civic engagement in our urban Indigenous communities?
Sure. Well, I think when we talk about civic engagement, I think what's really important is that so often, we have just all the fanfare and, you can't turn on TV without seeing advertisements, right, around campaigns and election season. And we go. And then we elect someone. It cannot stop there, right? Like that is where it's really important for us to continue to engage with folks. Because I think, electoral politics is a way to contest for power. It is a tool in our toolbox to try to get what we need. And it doesn't exist alone, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is electoral politics. It is grassroots community organizing. And then it's public policy. And I just made a triangle. And it's all of those things working together, which back in the day we called the Wellstone Triangle, because that's something that Paul Wellstone also taught us. In each of those sectors, those things need to be strong so that once we get folks elected, they're moving policies forward that reflect the community from which they came. Mm-hmm. And so voting is super important. And I know that the Make Voting a Tradition that has come out of the Native American Community Development Institute, the power of that, I think, is connecting voting to our identity. Mm-hmm. One of the things that's, I think sometimes it's hard, right, to be part of a system and a government system and be engaged when many of our relatives have seen that system do harm to us.
Yes.
And so I feel that and I hold that. And I also know that these systems are accountable to us. And so I vote in tribal elections, right? And I vote in local, state, and federal elections too, because all of those bodies impact my life and impact my family. Mm-hmm. So, when we go to the voting booth, I always bring my daughter with me in the same way that my mom brought me. And I, when I could, now she's big, she's 8, like I would hoist her up on my hip, right? And we would fill in the bubbles together and talk about it. Mm-hmm. Because I want her to know that this is part of our identity as a family. It is part of our tradition, as the phrase goes, that NACDI's built a campaign around, and that matters. But it's also, once people are in there calling, emailing, right, inviting elected officials into community events to hear directly from people who are most impacted, that needs to continue. And I think about, my sisters, right, Senator Kunesh and Representative Becker-Finn and Representative Keeler. We can lean on each other, we can rely on each other, and we need to make sure that we stay connected in community and that there are ways that the community can also help to sort of, be there for us. And I use this motion with my hands to sort of help keep us steady. Because as we're walking into these systems that weren't made by us or for us, sometimes it can be a little lonely and a little isolating. So that matters too. But really it's making it as personal as possible. And Nicole, this, right? Like, as you have gone and you have talked to elected officials and done this lobbying and had these conversations, that you can give someone, a fact sheet. And that is an important tool, but the most important tool is the tool of narratives and talking about our direct experience with something that is happening, to then be able to empower our electeds to tell that story too and amplify it. But that's what changes hearts and minds. And I think that's really what civic engagement is all about.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I know growing up, my grandfather was very political and tribally political. And when I was growing up, my mom never voted, only in tribal elections. She only voted in tribal elections. And when I became, of age to be able to vote, I was like, Mom, you have to vote. And she was like, no, we only vote in tribal elections because the rest of the people don't care about us. They don't care about our people. They don't. So I will just vote in our own tribal elections. And I'm like, but they're still making decisions about our communities, about, our livelihood. Like they're making really important decisions that impact our families. And if we don't have a say-so in there, then they're just going to make decisions without us. And that was the first time, probably because I bugged her so much, but it was the first time that she really, that she voted in a federal election. And then, when my mom moved back to her tribal community, she ended up being very political herself. So, so it's great, I love the story you tell about, making sure that your daughter is with, right? Because that's how we pass those teachings on to our kids. I too bring my kids, but also kind of, how I also shared that with my mom, and those teachings go, for our whole communities, because I think we have felt really left out of a lot of conversations. And I think, now we are seeing a lot more representation in our government, and that really matters. Like, we are really seeing some amazing work get done. So could you talk a little bit about what role you have in state government as the lieutenant governor, and what power do you have to make change?
So I wanted to mention this really quickly because I think it sort of builds on what you were just talking about what difference it makes when we have leaders at the table who look like us.
Mm-hmm.
And, for my daughter and for your grandchild, right, there is what is now normal.
Yes.
Is that we now have Indigenous people in office, right? So my kiddo, right, is like, oh, that's Auntie Jamie, right? Or like, she told me after her first day of school, she's like, Mommy, there's a poster of Auntie Deb hanging in the hallway at school. And so this is just her normal, is that Deb Haaland is the Secretary of the Interior, and that is now her expectation. And that, Mom is lieutenant governor, and all of her, her aunties are in the legislature. And that our biggest opportunity is to continue that momentum in this moment. Mm-hmm. I don't want this to be a blip on the screen, right? I want this to just be the way it is. And so that's why, beyond, partisan politics, is just that we are engaged and involved because we can see what a difference that makes. As lieutenant governor, to be really candid, if you look it up in statute, there's not a long description of what the lieutenant governor does, right? I am the chair of the Capital Area Security Advisory Committee. And then I am the chair of the Capital Area Architectural and Planning Board, which in that role has been really important to make sure that we are changing the way that we engage with people inside and outside the Capitol, so that when people walk into the Capitol or on the grounds, they feel seen, heard, valued, and represented. So that's part of my work, which I'm really excited about, and that's in statute. The rest of it, honestly, is like, be ready, right? Like, God forbid, just in case, right? And so I take that really, really seriously. But in my role, the things that I've been able to do and to work on, one of the reasons why I'm in this role and why the governor asked me to be in this role is because of work around family economic security issues like childcare, paid family and medical leave, livable wages for families, working on issues around our relatives experiencing homelessness, and ensuring that we are working on issues regarding our missing and murdered Indigenous relatives. And that has been a place, because I'm a policy nerd. I came from the legislature, but before that was an advocate through my role at Children's Defense Fund. And that's all the stuff that like gets me up in the morning. How can we make things better for people of color, for Native folks, for low-income families, and especially for children? And so the power of the role in many ways is being at the table. Mm-hmm. I don't have a vote in the way that, I would in the legislature. And, my power is really grounded in being able to shape our policy agenda, being able to influence the way that we create and craft our budget, because I think sometimes that is that's something that folks don't totally understand, which is like the governor sets the budget, right? Like the vision and the policy priorities, and then the legislature gets to decide how to actually spend that money. So we try to set a vision and then work with the legislature to move the things that are important to us and just overall to Minnesotans. So I have an experience in the legislative branch, which is powerful and about coalition building and counting the votes. And in the executive branch, much of it is setting the tone and being able to fight for the things that we hear from people on a regular basis that are their priorities, and building relationships.
Mm-hmm.
That has been something that has been incredibly important and valuable, and with folks where we may not agree on much of anything, there are points of connection. And I think that's why stuff like the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force was able to get done. And then we were able to pass and implement the office, which will be opening very, very shortly. So that's the role. And part of it is just trying to be as engaged and persuasive as possible on a lot of these issues and being in the room. And towards the end of this last legislative session, in negotiations and being at the table, even if it's a virtual table right now, yes, that matters. And then the chair of Ways and Means is Representative Rena Moran, who is an incredible leader, a strong Black woman, whose own life experience of navigating systems and being formerly homeless, like she brings that into the space and into the room. So the kind of conversation, it's the first time ever that a Native woman and a Black woman have been in negotiations in the state of Minnesota. And that is changing things. I think that those are the opportunities that are ahead of us. So long story long, the role of the Lieutenant Governor is to be ready to tend for those committees that I am the chair of, and also to push really hard on the policies that impact folks who've been historically unheard.
Thank you. You mentioned sort of the budgeting process, which I think, thank you for kind of laying that out a little bit about how that happens. Can you talk about, and you mentioned a couple of victories that we have certainly celebrated, but could you talk about some of those victories, those key victories that you're really proud of passing in your time as Lieutenant Governor?
Sure. I would lift up primarily, and this is kudos really to you, Nicole, and to all of the advocates. And I saw it pop up on the screen here, great grandmother Mary Lyons, who is part of this discussion. It is, and I'm getting a little emotional as I'm talking about this in this moment. I think there has been, over the last several years, pushing for policy around missing and murdered Indigenous women, and the conversation begins to change when we are at the table. And so in the legislature, and then when I was able to be at the table as Lieutenant Governor, suddenly we had multiple branches, of the executive and the legislative pushing for this policy, but also knowing the only reason this is possible is because of the people who told their stories in committee, the people who have lost loved ones, the people who, the mothers who refuse to give up, searching and fighting for their daughters and for their children. And I am so grateful that we passed this first task force. We're able to do a lot of that work. People told their stories. And my hope is that we don't need to continue to re-traumatize people. We believe them the first time they tell us these stories. And that is the result now in the MMIR office, was a huge victory. And to be really candid, one of the first conversations I ever had with Paul Gazelka, with former Majority Leader Paul Gazelka, was about MMIW. And he was like, hey, I saw this movie, Wind River, and with my daughter. And I was like, well, I'd like to talk to you about that. There's a real opportunity for you to do something here. And he did, right? And now what we also see is that our missing and murdered African American women task force just passed. So it's exciting, and there's momentum where we are able to talk about the things that we are experts in our own lives and just simply needed to be at the table to be able to move these forward. And I'd also say that a thing that we are now starting to talk about that happened a little bit behind the scenes is that we were able to get Indigenous education for all. And that will require, right, that we have more resources available so that every child, Native and non-Native, will know that they are in Minnesota Makoche, and that Native people were here before Minnesota was Minnesota. We are still here, and we will continue to be here. Is a huge victory, so that sometimes the conversations that we even have with legislators that I know you have had as well, there's folks who don't even know that we're still here and we exist, who are in decision-making roles. So if we can start early, we can get to a much better place. And I'm excited about that. And finally, I will say that like huge shout out to the urban Native community is equity and grant making. That, you know, we heard directly from leaders who said, like, we are experts in our own communities and our own lives. Mm-hmm. And so when funding goes out, right, it, you know, traditionally has gone to like big dog organizations who have multiple grant writers and multi-million-dollar budgets to then say like, oh, we said we were going to work with Native people. Do you want to partner with us on this and like get the crumbs, instead of saying like, we're going to direct dollars into organizations who are leading and doing this work because we trust that they know their communities best. And so that has changed the way that we have operated. And honestly, that was a conversation, an accountability conversation, right, that we had with urban Native leaders that led to really positive change, just not just for the Native community, but for all communities and BIPOC communities, to change the way that we're doing this. And so I'm super excited about that work too.
That's awesome. Thank you. And, you know, I think that, you know, being in leadership, I think, and I have seen you do this for as long as I've known you, is showing up and listening, and then taking action on what you hear. And that creates incredible change. And so, you know, I'm really grateful for your leadership, not just as Lieutenant Governor, but over decades of your work and ways of showing up in our communities that I think has been really impactful. You know, the work of elected officials can be difficult and complicated, especially for people who are unfamiliar with how these systems work. What do you think is a key strategy to make sure that that people's voices are being heard?
So I think a big piece of it is just being willing to build relationships. And we are in a moment, we've all just gone through and are still, frankly, enduring tremendous trauma. Mm-hmm. And the COVID-19 pandemic, I will just be very honest. You know, I lost my dad, Marvin, right before COVID hit. And then shortly thereafter, lost my brother, who was a proud Native man and a Marine, and acted all tough, but was really a big teddy bear, and lost him. He was the second person to pass away from COVID in Tennessee. My husband lost his father. And I just lost my auntie, my namesake, my auntie Peggy, in May. And so it is also knowing that there are so many other people who have experienced many of those things as well. And I want to name that vulnerability too, because I feel like sometimes we have expectations of our elected officials that they're not human beings or people. And so it's been hard. And that there has been, of course, the trauma around the murder of George Floyd and Dante Wright. And that our communities have also been, on the front lines of many issues that are deeply connected and traumatic to our identity of who we are as Indian people. And so, that all being said, I think that's where the relationship piece is so important, to try to see each other as human beings first, and then determine what it is that we can do together to move forward. One of the most powerful things that we before COVID, but we've seen it influence the way that we have responded to this issue, has been the governor and I went to did a shelter tour. We went to 2 shelters in Minneapolis and talked directly to the people who were staying there. And then we went to an encampment under a bridge in St. Paul and sat in lawn chairs for 2 hours, talking directly to people about their experiences and their trauma, and the just incredible willingness of people to engage with us there was the fuel for the fire for all of the things that we've been able to do to try to move additional resources to our relatives experiencing homelessness. And those opportunities, again, I would just say, like, one of the best ways to do this is to invite people in to your, to electeds into your events and to communities. If you see someone in the community, an elected, to have a conversation about what matters to you and what's important. Personalizing those emails, those form emails are fine, but like making it very personal, I think, can make a big difference. And also just starting to get engaged and involved just in your local district or your neighborhood. If you identify with a particular political party, learning about their caucus process and getting engaged and involved there, because just simply showing up makes a tremendous difference, and you don't know what you will be able to influence by simply showing up and raising your voice. And I think that is just tremendously powerful in this moment. And remembering also that, like, Twitter is not real life, I think is important too, that it's one of the ways that we can identify and raise awareness about the things that we care about, and the actual engagement and testifying or sending that letter or making that phone call of trying to find those places where we can work together, I think is really powerful. And what makes a difference. And Nicole, I see, I see MUSEC do that, and I see you do that all the time, that there may be, moments where we don't always agree on every issue, but focusing on those places where we just have to get this done for our people, and pushing in those spaces is what gets things over the finish line. Absolutely.
And you brought up and first of all, I want to say I'm sorry for the loss of many relatives, and I know many of us have experienced loss in this last year and a half, not only family members and loved ones, but community felt loss. And I grew up in Minneapolis. I'm a Minneapolis girl, and it was really painful this last year to see my city burning and to see the pain and the trauma. So my question is, in leadership and in the role you're in, there's a lot, and a lot gets thrown at you, and there's a lot of pressure on you. And what do you do to take care of yourself, to stay grounded? I know for me, like, spirituality is really important to me, and laughter, that includes laughter with my kids and snuggles with my grandson. But what do you do to take care of yourself and make sure you stay grounded through everything?
That's a really good question, and it's been hard. I think one of the things that I try to remind myself of is that when we are working in these systems, change is hard and it takes a long time. And so when I think about like the increase, as an example, that we got to the Minnesota Family Investment Program to MFIP, right? $100 increase for families that hadn't happened for 33 years since my family was on MFIP and I was a first grader, right? That took a long time, right, for us to get there. And remembering that we are, sometimes you fight these fights over multiple legislative sessions, over multiple generations, even, right, with a lot of the things that we are trying to move, and just holding that. And I think that sometimes, that I certainly do this, as a Native woman, I think about that you feel the responsibility of the whole world and the whole community. And if I don't do this, like, how are we ever going to be able to move forward? And it's a good reminder that that we are here for this moment and for this time. And our job is to do as much good as we can with what we have. And, my dad would often say to me, my girl, he said, I want to burn the system down and you want to change it from the inside out. And we need both. And that, to me, is something that I try to hold in those moments, right? That there have been times when I have been a protester, right, on the front lines. There are times when I have been in the legislature working to change the law. And now in this moment, in my role, I am trying to bring the voice of our people into the room to push for the policies that we need and the investments in our communities. And whatever my next role is, I'll still be able to move my vocation, which is to make sure that our people are seen and heard and valued and believed. It just might look a little different. So that's what has been helpful in sort of reminding me that, like, I'm standing on the shoulders of ancestors. I'm standing on the shoulders of my dad in this role, even though, he didn't like the system or trust the system. But I can work to try to bring change to that system, remembering to use our medicines, and having people in my life who, if I'm having a bad day, I remember like one specific instance where I called Representative Becker Finn, who's one of my very best friends. And I was in a swirly of doom, just like in a bad place. And she was like, why don't you go smudge outside and call me back? And it was sort of this like really good, just sort of check yourself. Like, there are things that we have and there are tools that we have. And, things like being in ceremony and water walks and remembering, who we are and where we come from. That is a challenge when you are in these systems. So that is a commitment that I am recommitting to for my, my physical health, which all of us have been challenged with during COVID, and my mental health, but also my spiritual health. And I am on a journey, and it is not perfect, and I don't always do it, well, but try to do the best I can. And just simply being in community more recently, as we have been at events and masking up, but also being in community has been really important, because sometimes I can get really caught up in the social media stuff and feel it's hard, and it's hard to read, and it does impact me. I do not yet have the skin that is thick enough for those things to not hurt. And knowing that there are some things that I can't change, and there are particular roles that I am in that I am not a decision maker in, but I can try to do as much as I can for our people with the power and position that I do have. And that's what I'm going to do. And that having some peace in that is has made a real difference in my life. And to be really honestly, very recently, being able to be more grounded in that, because it's been hard, but I made a commitment to do this job and to try to push as hard as I can internally in a system and raise my voice externally to try to move things that I know will make a difference for people.
And I thank you for all of that. And sister to sister, you are always in my prayers, and I always send some love for protection to you. And, I really thank you for your leadership. And in closing, is there anything you want to leave people with?
Yeah, just how powerful you are. We talking about the word power, I think, is sometimes complicated, right? As Native people, because we have seen it used in ways that has been destructive. But I think, power itself is neutral. It's what we do with that power that makes a difference. And I think one of the things for us to really carry and know is that each of us has a role, right? And nobody's role is more important than anybody else's. It's just, you have the role, you have your gift, you step into the circle when you are needed, and you step out when it is time for someone else to step in. So figuring out what your role is, what your gift is, what you lose track of time doing to make the community better, but knowing that registering to vote and voting is incredibly important. Sharing your story and your narrative because you are an expert in your own life. There are a whole bunch of elected officials who are in positions where you probably know more than they do, and should know that you are an expert in your own experience, and that experience is worth hearing and folks listening to. And then also want to plant the seed for folks that if you think that you might be called to run for office, to answer that call. And to think about if that is an opportunity for you as well. But we all have a role to be civically engaged, the same way that we all have a role in the community to make things better for our people, and to remember that. And I think about the work that the Native American Community Development Institute does around civic engagement, making sure that people are registering to vote, but they also know what's on the ballot and what does this office do, right? And making sure that people are empowered when they go to cast their ballot, that they know what they're voting for and why it matters and how it impacts their lives. And then just, there's city elections that are coming up in the city of Minneapolis and St. Paul. We then have the 2022 elections where there's a whole bunch of stuff on the ballot. So just starting now to educate yourself about what's there, and if something is calling to you to get more engaged and involved, try to answer that call. Our government is only as good as the people who show up and shape it. And in 2022, it is a policy year at the legislature. So if you have some feelings about what policies should be moving and the things that you care about, this is a real opportunity to be engaged and involved. We have one of the only divided legislatures in the country, which means sometimes things are slow to change. But we absolutely get to set the vision for the kind of place that we want to live. And that is our role, is dreaming big and then trying to implement those things together to make our state a better place to live.
Those are all great tips. And, even with the divided legislature, we've gotten a lot done. So
That's right.
It certainly makes me feel very hopeful. I just want to thank you, Chimigwich, for this conversation. Thank you to NACDI for giving us this opportunity to visit this morning and to talk a little bit more with our community about how people can really get engaged. And how we can all come together and do more work and lift up our voices, because it really is about people's stories, and that's so much more impactful than the numbers and the all of the other statistical analysis and all of those things. It's really about the humanness and all of us included. So thank you so much for this time this morning, and thank you to everyone who's been listening today. And I'm not sure if Elizabeth was on and wanted to make any final comments, but I just want to say thank you to everyone, and thank you, Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Nicole.
Chumigwich, thank you all for joining us today. It was such a wonderful conversation, and I'm really motivated and excited to keep these conversations going. So, thank you all.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Goodbye.
Gigawabaman.
Gigawabaman.